may be familiar with my book, The Little Gate Crasher. It's available at all, anywhere you buy books, you can find it. And I've also written question guides if that's helpful for a community. But it is about my great uncle, Mace Bugan. And while I was working on this book, I realized I had a lot of insights about the lived experience of my great uncle, who I'm going to tell you about in just a moment, and what the parallels were between my own son, who has multiple disabilities. So as I share this story, it may bring to surface for you your own disability, a loved one, a student, someone in your community or congregation who has a disability. And so often we don't have opportunities to share those stories. And so I'm going to begin there. And if someone comes up for you that you're thinking about as I share, please feel to write about or to share your story in the chat button. So now a bit about my family story. If you lived in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania between 1940 and 1980, you likely would have seen my great uncle, Moishe Morris, or Mace Bugan as he was known, driving his open roof Jeep painted with blue and white stars and a sign that read Hadassah across the front window. Many thought of Mace as a one-man parade of Jewish pride. Pedestrians would call out, "Hey, Macy," when they saw him coming, and he would wave back to them with an official air. Hadassah, his beloved Jeep, was equipped with custom pedals that reached his feet. Mace was my grandmother's younger brother, born in 1915 with achondroplasia, a bone growth disorder that causes the most common form of dwarfism. His head grew normally while his height topped out at 43 inches. Mace had a hump on his back and a crooked spine that deteriorated as he aged. However, what made Mace memorable were not his physical characteristics, but it was his resilience in the face of society's prejudices and also Mace's oversized chutzpah. In examining my great uncle's life for my recent book about him, The Little Gate Crasher, I was reminded of how far the United States has come in advancing the rights of people with disabilities. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990, which among its provisions requires that public spaces are accessible for people with mobility issues. But when Mace drove to events, he often had to park on the lawn close to the entrance because there were simply no designated accessible parking spaces. As the mother of a child with cognitive disabilities, my 20-year-old son, George, is on the autism spectrum. He has an intellectual disability and also bipolar disorder. I am keenly aware that families still need to fight for their children's access to education, to therapy, and to inclusion and belonging in the community. I have newfound appreciation for my great-grandparents who made sure that even if the world outside scorned Mace, home was a place of unconditional love. And that was quite unusual for that era when children with differences were typically sent to institutions. Mace had a bar mitzvah, became his school's team manager, graduated from high school. He went on to become a successful real estate agent. And in the book, I share his amazing photos. He had an amazing hobby of taking photos with the celebrities of his time. And his impressive collection includes photos of himself with Joe DiMaggio, Ella Fitzgerald, Muhammad Ali, Sammy Davis Jr., and many, many more. But despite great Uncle Mace's successes, his choices were limited because of the lack of accommodations for his disability. For my part, I remember him as the most fun-loving adult from my youth. When he came to visit, his pockets were full of candy, and he piled my siblings and me into his Jeep Hadassah to go get ice cream. As my research for the book deepened, I discovered a kindred spirit in my great-grandmother, Sarah, who like her, was the mom of a child with differences. I am like her in that way. But I live in a time when I have support in my community. I can easily go online to find resources and to find other parents who share my experience. But my great-grandmother had none of that. She used her instincts and her heart to guide her parenting of her child. And so in sharing my great uncle's story, I'm claiming my family's legacy of honoring differences and holding up expectations that my son's life will not be defined by his disability. While the parallels between my great uncle's dwarfism and my son's cognitive disabilities and mental health challenges may not seem obvious, both of their lives reflect the tremendous diversity of the human experience, and that is to be celebrated. My son struggles with communication and social understanding, and these are struggles that he will have for all of his life. But with the help of his family and community, he can access love and affection. And my hope this month and always is that our Jewish community continues to do events like this to raise awareness about the need for welcoming, supporting, and creating accommodations for people with disabilities. And that we remember and model the stories of people like my amazing uncle, who claimed his right to be a valued member of his community. And so I'm going to take a pause and let that story sink into you. If you have something that it resonated for you, a person that came up, please hold them in your heart. If you're able, if you want, you can share something about them in the chat. And for the rest of our time together, I'm going to tell you a bit more about my work, about things that all of us can do to create a more accessible Jewish community. And we'll also have time for your questions and comments. So I look forward to it all. And thank you so much. Here come the slides. We're thinking today about inclusion, specifically disability inclusion as a Jewish value. Here we go. And so, as I said, a little bit about me. There's my book. Here's some pictures of my family. These are when my kids were younger. They are 20 and 17 now. And parenting a child with developmental and intellectual disabilities for sure changed my path as a Jewish educator and made me so much more aware of the need for accommodations and accessibility. And those are some pictures if you wanted to bring up about Uncle Mace, who I was describing. That's him and my grandmother's to the side of him with the little short haircut, and his siblings and cousins, and my great-grandmother, again, born in 1915 when there was such a lack of awareness about difference and what a path leader he was in his insistence to have education and to build his business. There is my sister and I sitting with Uncle Mace at the Passover Seder. So what is this month all about? Some of you may be very familiar with this acronym, JDAIM. Some of you may be new to it, may be curious when you saw 70 Faces Media share about it. So it stands for Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month. And this incredible month that was started by Jewish activists and advocates way over a decade ago, I think this is the 14th year, it's really a very grassroots movement that has taken off around the world, because we know that despite our efforts, there are still many ways that our community is not fully inclusive. And so this work is work that we all need to do all year long, 365 days a year. But February is a time to just really spotlight the work. And I'm using this term disability inclusion a lot. You may or may not be familiar with it. So I want to just begin by giving you this definition. It actually comes right from the Center for Disease Control. But what we mean by disability inclusion is including people who have disabilities, again, could be a range of disabilities, in everyday activities and encouraging them to have roles similar to their peers who do not have disabilities. Yeah, I want to just say, I know, thank you for putting comments and questions in. I'm going to probably stay on track, but at the end, I want to come back to and read everything that you put into the chat so I can respond to it. And again, as we think about Jewish community, and I see there's a chat about someone's own child, you know, when we think about everyday activities, that would include going to camp, going to Hebrew school, going to Tat Shabbat. For adults, having a job, having hobbies, having clubs you go to, being part of adult education at your synagogue. And so are these everyday activities that are part of Jewish life accessible and inclusive? And I invite you to think about that as we go along. What is Jewish about all of this? Oh, thank you. Someone put, it started in 2009. Thank you very much, Cassie. What's inclusion about it? What's Jewish about the inclusion and accessibility piece? Well, we know from our texts, from our ancient texts, here's one that we're very familiar with from Leviticus, that this is not a conversation that we started in 2009. This is a conversation that goes way, way back in the history of human beings, and that we as Jewish people have been trying to figure out. And again, I just want to say, for my own ability to focus, I'm going to wait until the last 15 minutes to get to your comments and questions, but I want you to know I see them going into the chat, and I appreciate that. So as I said, as I was sharing my personal family story, this may be bringing up for you. You may be here because you're thinking about your own disability and how it impacts your life. You may be thinking of a loved one, a friend, a family member, a student. And as we go through this presentation, I think it's helpful to think about someone personally, because when we think about this big issue, I'll share some numbers. It can feel overwhelming. Oh, people with disabilities, whether we're in that, we consider ourselves in that category or outside of it. For me, it helps us to come back to a person. And so as I'm sharing, I hope that you may have a person or several in mind that you're thinking about. So yeah, let's stop here for a minute. Disability is a huge term, as I said. It encompasses many things. And in some ways, this is what has made a disability rights movement and disability rights activism very complex, because we're talking about such a range of disabilities. And so these are some of the disabilities. There are others. Chronic illness certainly falls into this category. And so when we're thinking about our Jewish spaces, we're cognizant that there are a range of accommodations that we're considering. So I want to introduce this concept. Some of you may be familiar already. You could put your little thumbs up sign on your Zoom screen if, someone mentioned depression is missing from the list. It is not an exhaustive list at all. It's a list to get us started about the range of disabilities, absolutely. But mental health is a huge category that encompasses many things. So some of you may be familiar, and PTSD, absolutely. With this idea, with the concepts in this picture. So I want to talk about it for a minute as we're thinking about how we can take steps to create more inclusive and accessible places. So if we go to the far left, we see these three children. They're each given a box. There's this big wooden fence. They're there clearly to watch the game. And we could say, well, this is equal. Every child gets a box. But we know that that's not what each of those kids need. Their height differs. And so giving them all a box means that the kids on the left are able to see the game, but we have one child who's completely missing out of the experience. When we go to the middle illustration, we see that the kids have probably worked together to figure out something better. This fence is still a barrier, but they've come up with a way to create an accommodation. And the smallest child sees the game, is able to participate. The middle child, still has the support he needs. The tallest child on the left is able to see without needing any kind of box. On the far right, we have an image of greater accessibility. The design itself of the fence has been changed. And with that design of the fence, where you can see through it to watch the game, we actually don't need those boxes at all. And so this is really a metaphor to get us all thinking about what are the ways we can change our designs. The physical structures of our buildings, yes. Attitudinal designs, creative planning, thinking about the ways we set up programs and providing different accommodations. What if we're able to think in a way so that everyone, regardless of what their needs are, will have a space? And again, not just a physical space, but a communal space, a space of belonging. And so that's what I'm hoping we'll consider in our time together. Why this work is so essential to our Jewish community, I tell you, it affects all of us. 1 in 5 families directly has a family member with a disability. And so that could be a child, parent, grandparent, sibling, whoever it might be. And so when we think of, oh my gosh, what if there are 100 children in our religious school and 1 in 5 of those families have a child with a disability? It not only affects that child's access, but also siblings, parents, grandparents, the whole ability of people to be in Jewish community together. I'm going to take a pause just to tell you briefly about some of the things that we do in Philadelphia through our whole community inclusion initiative. I hope they inspire you. If your community isn't yet doing this work together, I am happy. I'm available to you to talk about some ways that you could get started. But we have programs that we provide for families where, for example, this coming Sunday, we're doing here in Philadelphia, we have this amazing museum, the Weitzman National Museum of Jewish History. And when you go to visit the museum, and I don't know how many of you have, but the museum is full of different exhibits that have a ton of audio. There are recordings of people and interviews and this and that, and there's a lot of audio. And so when you walk through the exhibit, you get that experience of hearing different voices. For children who have sensory sensitivity, or adults, I should say, and where that level of noise is not only distracting, but overwhelming. In our sensory friendly program that will be held at the museum, during those hours of the program, 3 to 5, all of the audio in the museum will be turned off. So that's one way that we're making it a sensory friendly space. We've provided quiet and calming rooms at big communal events, and we're teaching our partners how to do that. So with Purim coming up, and I know there are lots of comments in the chat, and I love them. I'm gonna keep going, just so you know, I see them, and then I'm gonna digest them in about 10 or 12 minutes. But in the case of Purim, for example, where you're going to have big carnivals and lots going on and people and games and smells of the food and the DJ pumping music, you can create a calming space and let folks know that there's a place with quiet toys and, you know, different kinds of seatings. So these sensory friendly environments can become part of your synagogue, part of all your Jewish programs. We do parent seminars. We have a lot of professional development for the people working in our schools. These are some of the examples. And we do communal advocacy, continually raising awareness across the Jewish community through forums like this and many others. So what are the barriers? And some of you I know are already sharing personally about barriers you've experienced or that loved ones in your life have experienced. We could put them into these categories, and there are certainly many, many more categories that are barriers. But again, that attitude, the stigma. So going back to my great uncle who was a dwarf, born in 1915. People stared at him his entire life. People jeered at him or teased him on the street. We might think these things don't happen today, but they continue to happen. You can follow people on social media who have dwarfism or any kind of facial difference, and you'll hear about attitude and stigma, the same across many different kinds of disabilities. So if we think that isn't a factor in our community, we probably are not aware of how much it really is. Physical accessibility is huge. Synagogues, like other houses of worship, were let go. We're not included in the Americans with Disabilities Act. So it is not a legal requirement to have a bima that someone with mobility issues could access. There's no legal requirement. That has to be a moral, ethical requirement that our communities create. Educational access. We might have great educational programs from early childhood, Hebrew school, youth group, adult education. But if we haven't figured out how do our neurodivergent kids access those programs, how do all of our kids access them? That's a barrier to inclusion. And then finally, this idea of a full participation and belonging. Like you show up at the synagogue event and you have friends to talk to at Kiddush, right? Think about what full participation and belonging means to you in Jewish spaces. I'm going to pause for just a second. If you'd be willing to share what that means to you in the chat, I would love to hear that. What does it mean for you to feel like, oh yeah, I belong? And it may not be in Jewish community. It may be in a club, in a neighborhood group, in something else. But what does that mean? Because it's more abstract when we think about a sense of belonging. So I'm going to pause for a sense. And if you're comfortable, please share an idea about your own belonging in the chat.
Gabrielle, we actually have someone who raised their hand. Do you think we have time to hear from someone? From Jerry?
I think we will.
Okay, great.
Sure.
Jerry, I'm asking you to unmute now, so we look forward to hearing you.
Hi. One of the things that concerns me is that whether it's within the Jewish community or outside, those of us who suffer from electromagnetic radiation poisoning, which comes from anything wireless, cell phones, hearing loops that are used in buildings, smart meters on buildings, all of this makes everywhere inaccessible to us. The ADA does not help because we are told, well, that's not a reasonable request for accommodation. And also there have been some extremely ugly fights within the disability community of our community fighting against the deaf community because they need the hearing loop, which is understandable, but it's wireless. That keeps us out of those buildings. So I don't know what the answer is, but we as a group, and there are millions of us in this country and around the world, we have become more and more isolated. I'm homebound. I cannot go anywhere. I can't get medical care because even hospitals now have all gone wireless. I can't go to a doctor. I can't go to a dentist. I can't go to any store or any building because they all have smart meters on them. We are extremely isolated, and people have basically told us tough.
Mm.
From other disabled people also, like too bad. So how do you decide whose disabilities take precedence for accommodation? I mean, it's just gotten so ugly, and it's just really sad that it's come down to this.
Well, I want to just pause and thank you for your courage in sharing that. I want to say that the emotion I heard in your voice is just a lot of pain, and how much pain you're holding, because we all need community and we all need belonging. And what an incredible challenge you're facing, and others who have the same issue, that that you're not able to get access to community. And I want to name something really important, that sometimes this is why this work is complex and hard and challenging. One person's accommodation can be another person's barrier. So it requires ongoing creativity and ongoing work. And I pray that you can find community with others who are in a similar situation to you, and figure out what it would be like to have a low-tech remote community because you're homebound. And I don't know the answer to it, but I do think that joining together with other folks in your situation is a good place to begin. And I want to really just honor the strength that you have in what sounds like an incredibly, incredibly challenging situation. And I also want to name that, sometimes we're afraid in all walks of life. This is beyond disability, just as human beings, sometimes that, we need help, we need support to cope with whatever the challenges are we're facing. And I know that in the work that I do with clergy, sometimes they feel like, people don't always reach out for pastoral support or know that that's available. And very often they want to offer it. So if there are any rabbis or cantors or spiritual guides in your life, you might reach out to not necessarily solve the problem, but to listen to this very big quandary that you're holding of how to access the care you need and find community. So thank you. And we can keep going. So there are some solutions I'm just going to put out as ideas. These are teeny ideas to get you started, all of these. I hope that when we open up for comments and questions, we'll get more into sort of what you're doing in your community. Some things that I've seen that help to remove the barrier of stigma are having these conversations, just having a forum like this where we can begin to normalize. This is really hard, thinking about disability accommodations, and look what's come up and the pain and the barriers. Let's have these conversations all the time. I know a lot has come up in the chat around mental health issues. And again, I'm writing that specifically, that we're talking about physical, learning, developmental disabilities, and bringing mental health in. I think disability awareness education for kids is essential. We've created, and I'll put the link in the chat in just a moment. We've created lesson plans that are free, that any educator can download and use with their students. And kids love them. They love to share about disability and inclusion and accessibility and be creative, and opportunities for kids to share as self-advocates about their own disability experience with their peers is really important. Looking around in your community, if you're part of a congregation or an organization, making sure people have opportunities to share their lived experiences. And in some cases, organizations and communities may want to create a committee to really keep this work going forward. Some solutions around physical accessibility. Again, these are just a few to get us going. Make sure at every event, the big forum things coming up, right, that there are ample parking spaces. You know, we again get into ADA mindset. We need to have this many parking spaces, especially as people in our community may be aging and more people need accessible parking. People may have temporary disabilities, injuries. There may be a pregnant person who would like a spot closer to the building, whatever it might be. That's something easy we can set up with cones and communicate to our community. That we have places for our live events coming back that wheelchair users can have access. People who, I have lots of friends who lip read because of their hearing, and just knowing that, oh, those spaces are reserved for people who need it. I've helped communities think through how to create accessible Torah reading tables, having folding chairs around, different size chairs for different size bodies. You know, often we have events, oh, let's all have a picnic and we're all gonna spread blankets and sit on the ground. And just knowing we have different kinds of bodies, that doesn't work for everyone. Visual supports, there are more available, from magnifying pages to making sure you have large print sidurim. Hearing supports, we have a live captioner here today, for example, and making sure that our spaces not only have accessible entrances that people are getting in, but paying attention to restrooms is critical. We can go, okay. So some work that we've done around that educational access I've mentioned. Our Jewish educators need professional development. We know that many of our Jewish educators are arriving in camp and summer camp and Hebrew school and youth group because they love Judaism. They love Jewish kids. They want to share their love of Judaism, and they may not be trained professionally as educators. So we can give them that. We can teach them about accessible, inclusive education. Many synagogues are able to have an inclusion specialist who can help read an IEP or 504 plan and translate it to the teachers. Some kids need an academic or behavior plan like they have in secular school to be in Jewish educational settings. We train teenagers to provide extra hand to teachers to do some one-on-one support, small group, help kids who might need to take more breaks or whatever it might be. And to make sure through all of our education, as I said, that captioning, ASL, whatever is available. In terms of full participation and belonging, identify who should people ask if they need accommodations. So for example, on all of our registration forms for Jewish Learning Venture events, we ask that question, do you need any kind of accommodations in order to participate in this event? And then if we receive feedback and comments, you know, like I will look at it first and say, oh, we need an interpreter. I have a relationship. I'll reach out and do that. Or I might bring on someone else in my team to provide those accommodations. So that's a really important place you can begin. Do you have on your website a statement? Do you list the kinds of accommodations that you provide? That's really important. Making sure there are opportunities for social engagement that include everyone, and to know that inclusion truly is an ongoing process. It's not a one and done. It's not a program. It's not one conversation. This is really the work that we're going to do to continually make sure that we're meeting the needs of people in our community. So yes, we all play a role in disability inclusion. It's in our schools, in our synagogues, in our camp. It's also just in our neighborhood, at the grocery store, places where you may see people with disabilities. And, or again, you yourself may be in community as a person with a disability, and to know that this is work that we do wherever we are in community. We do get better with practice. If any of this presentation felt overwhelming to you, maybe it's outside of your experience, maybe you haven't thought about inclusion and accessibility that much, it's okay. Be patient, be in process, and know that there are just so many opportunities that will come up for you as you expand the realm of how you connect and relate to people. I do want to keep in touch with all of you. We're going to go to the conversational part of the program because I'm really excited to read all of the comments and respond and hear more. But I wanted to give you a few things. On our Jewish Learning Venture website, you can read in more depth about the programs I described and the work we're doing through whole community inclusion. So again, if that inspires you about something you can bring to your community, please reach out. And I'd love to share with you about that. We have another website called jkidaccess.org, and JKid Access has lots of free resources for families and educators. We have social stories, we have visual schedules, we have different ways to access Jewish holidays and values at home to use with kids. On my personal website, I have my books and publications and things you might want to check out there. I also was able to record an Eli talk that shares about my own personal experience and the way that we can think of a new paradigm to make sure that, especially for families who are raising kids with disabilities, that is my primary area of expertise. That there are lots of things we can do to make sure that we're considering the needs of those families. So that was my presentation to you. Now I get to digest in all these amazing comments and questions and things that came up while I was sharing. So I think I'm hoping that I can slide back in the chat and read them all. All right, so let's see. Mara, do you think there's a best way? Do you want to read a comment and I respond? That might be easier because there are a lot of comments.
Sure. I think first off, a lot of people are sharing their experiences with all different experiences, all different abilities. And let's see if a lot of people are sharing, but I'm looking for a specific question. So if anyone has any thoughts that they would specifically like to share, great, we have someone who has just raised their hands. I will ask for people to state their name before they ask a question. And I will now ask Rebecca to unmute.
Hi, can everyone hear and see me? All right, great. Thank you so much for that presentation. I really appreciate the focus on this. I had a very accessible synagogue, and I recently moved to Florida. And when I called the one synagogue here, I asked them about accessibility. I said, well, half the year they were out on the beach. And I said, oh, well, I have mobility issues. Can I access it? They said, probably not. And then they discouraged me from even getting help from, like, I didn't even ask this, but she discouraged me from getting help from anyone in the synagogue because of liability. And I said, oh, well, I don't need to be part of your congregation. So I really appreciate it. It's really important. And it's very interesting because I wasn't aware that spaces, although it seems obvious now because I've been to so many inaccessible spaces, that churches and synagogues aren't required to comply with ADA. Anyway, one thing I really wanted to bring up in terms of sort of thinking about modern issues with accessibility is immunocompromised people and what's going on with COVID. I have long COVID. I had some other health issues prior to COVID, but I got sick out the gate in like right away in March of 2020. And I spent like a year bedbound, had severe sensitivities. I mean, when I went to the long haul clinic, because I mostly was stuck healing on my own, they said I'm like the sickest they've been. But what I want to talk about is, and not just me, but other people who have severe risk from COVID or even catching basic things like colds. Because mask mandates have been lifted, I no longer have access to public space in any meaningful way. I actually had a second round of COVID, and mild physical therapy had been very helpful for me previously. I made a very hard decision to not do physical therapy this time because mask mandates are no longer in place and it's too dangerous for me. So I know that right now, you know, people have moved on, people feel like they're not going to get sick. But what I want to tell y'all, and there's plenty of writing on this, is that if you are not wearing a KN95 right now when COVID is still really bad, if you're not wearing it when you go to the grocery store, when you go to synagogue, people like me don't have meaningful access. Everything I do is laden with terror, and that's actually a reasonable assessment of my safety. So I know it's weird to be the only one masking when no one else is, but if you want to be an ally, be part of making social change so that we can actually have access. And I do understand that there are some people with certain disabilities who cannot wear masks. So I want to be clear, I'm not expecting those people to, but most people are able to wear masks and help us have accessibility. And I think that that's very important because most synagogues are no longer masking.
Right. Well, Rebecca, you bring up two really important things. So I actually want to pause and address both of them, even though your primary thing I know was your second point. I want to go back to the synagogue on the beach in Florida, because it makes my head explode if we could have a little animator on here doing like cartoon graphics, because we know that synagogues are struggling. And that's why I had that slide about it's 1 in 5 families. It's not just the person with the disability. There may be family members. We wonder why we're struggling to have members, and then someone calls. And I've worked here in the Philadelphia area in the synagogues I work to do this education about outdoor spaces, right? That there's one synagogue in particular I'm thinking of who always did in June, like their end of year, sort of out of school Shabbat in the park. And it was a beautiful, I love outdoor services. And so they were having Shabbat in the park, but there were people who couldn't come because of their mobility issues. And I just said to the rabbi in a conversation, oh, you know, there are these 3 parks in your area that all have accessible access from the parking lot, and there's a nice covered space and this and that. And he was like, there is? Oh, well, okay, we'll move it there. And then more people could go. It was like that simple. But I understand Jewish professionals are under so much pressure. So many things like, he just couldn't think that way. He needed this kind of conversation to raise up, oh yeah, that's what accessibility is. And I love in our beaches, I'm like, you know, like an hour and a half from the Jersey Shore. And there are more and more beaches that have wheelchair access right from the beach, and, you know, different kinds of support so that people with mobility issues, physical disabilities, can access the beach. So like my thing to that synagogue, in case you're listening, and any synagogue and who has beach access, find the accessible beaches. It should be. And the second issue that you brought up, Rebecca, obviously is very, very serious. And hearing from our immune compromised people in our community and people with long COVID. And it is this very painful time where it felt like, oh, we all had this shared experience of being frightened of getting COVID and needing to mask and being on lockdown and being isolated. Wouldn't that make human beings more empathetic to the fact that what if some people are still going through that? And human nature is complex and full of paradox, and it is very painful to see people making choices like, we're done with that. I think a lot of why I talk about my own family story and why I invite people to think about, if it's not your own lived experience, perhaps someone you know, is because I like to break down that vulnerability that we fear around disability. There's a way that I think people just want to put it over here. There are those people with long COVID. There are those people who can't go out. There are those people with PTSD, with autism, with fill it in, fill it in, fill it in. And it's over there. And so that's part of this inner work of breaking down, and why these conversations are so essential to just, if anyone is on here and that makes you really scared, what Rebecca shared, just be with that fear for a minute. Imagine that is you, and that you have no access to community because people are not willing to put masks on for you. And perhaps that will help you make a different choice. So that was long-winded, Rebecca, but what you said was so important, and I appreciate that you brought both of those things forward. All right, Mara, I know there are a few more hands.
Yes, and I do want to be mindful of time, so I think it may be best for me to call on Alexis, and then Sherry will take both of your questions at the same time, or one after the other. And then Gabrielle, you can address them both. But I know it's hard to keep comments short, but I will ask you to do your best. Alexis, you should now be able to unmute. Perfect.
As I have said in the chat, I have PTSD and I have a service dog because of it. I keep being told that my board has questions about Bentley, and it keeps coming back. That they keep having questions about Bentley and how Bentley would react in a given situation. Only thing is, they've never talked to me and asked me questions about how Bentley would react in these situations. And I don't think they're worried about how Bentley would react. They now know that I have PTSD, and their fear of the PTSD, well, let's just ignore the congregate and put it on his dog and say we're worried about how the dog will react. But yet they've never talked to me as his handler, and I know him far better than their speculation and, for lack of a better word, fear about him, about me, and especially my PTSD.
Yeah, thank you, Alexis. I'm going to hear Sherry's comment and then I'll speak to Bill. Sherry, do you want to unmute?
I'm trying.
Oh, there you are. You're good. You got it.
Okay, I'm good. Okay, this is actually a bit of a commercial. I put it in the chat, but for any of you looking for Jewish camping experiences for their child, whether they be typical camp age of, maybe 8 through 15, or 15, 18 up to 26, Camp Ramah, that's the national camping movement for the conservative Jewish movement, has, 9, 10 camps, maybe more now, nationally as well as into Canada. They almost all have the TIKVA program, that is for special needs campers. Many of them have the Ezra program, or it may go by another name at certain camps. This is a young adults, special needs young adults vocational program. My son, who's on the autism spectrum, low verbal, loves to sing, knows lots of brachot, but doesn't have good social interaction, doesn't have the verbal, had 5 phenomenal years in a Jewish camping experience, something that I had given up hope for, unlike his father and me, our older son, who all had those, and there was nothing available. So it is out there. I highly, highly recommend it.
Sherry, first of all, thank you so much. my family's a Rama family. We participated at Tikva Family Camp for like a decade. And I think it saved our family's life spiritually and emotionally. Having that family camp experience 5 days of summer really gave us the energy to be with other families, to be in an understanding and supportive environment. My younger child is a counselor at Rama Day Camp here in Philadelphia. So absolutely, I want to hold up. It's really important for us to know in our Jewish community and like do this. There are organizations that have been in the long haul doing this work, and Rama began, I think, around 1970 to do this work. So they are like pioneers, and to keep looking and finding those organizations. There are a lot listed on our website. Going back to Alexis, though, to me, wow, what I hear about your experience is why we need these communal conversations from the level of clergy to the level of board president to everyone involved in Jewish life to community member, because we live in a society that has prejudice and stigma. It is called ableism, the prejudice towards people with disability. And so their inability to have a conversation with you is the heart of the problem. They need to talk to you. They need to hear about your dog. They need to have you come and see you with their dog and to know, guess what? Yeah, we used to think of dogs working to help people who are blind as seeing eye dogs. That has changed. Look at what has happened with soldiers coming back from, Afghanistan and other places in our country. Many of them have dogs. My son had a companion dog. There are obviously other types of service animals that are being trained, but primarily dogs. And we got to be able to have these conversations and to people to normalize that there may be people coming who have dogs. Now, where I know it can get complex with animals is that thing about one person's accommodation can be another person's barrier. There may be someone with an allergy. There may be someone who's afraid of dogs. So, I mean, I'm not saying that it's perfect or easy, but it is possible, and I have seen it be possible. I am really sorry that I didn't get to all of the comments. There are so, and yeah, Alexis, I think just, and Bentley, just go back, go back. And if there's another place, maybe there's another place you can look. But I'm really sad if they make that decision. And what I want for you is to find community and to know that you and Bentley are deserving of community. And so in my heart, that is what my prayer is for you. And if that place ain't the place, they're going to be somewhere else. So I'm sorry that this hour went by very quickly. As you could see, I have a lot to share. But if you go to our jkidaccess.org website, our Jewish Learning Venture website, my personal website, I'll put in where you can find my books and publications. I really look forward to continuing this conversation with you. And Mara, I'll turn it back to you to say goodbye.
I just wanted to thank you all for being here. Gabrielle, this was really insightful and important. And I also want to thank Nicolia for offering our closed captioning. And I know that this is not the end of this conversation. This is only the beginning or part of it. And so thank you all for all of your work. Gabrielle, is there a closing thought you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, I think the closing thought is just for anyone who's feeling discouraged because you're not having access. I think, I just saw my colleague Char is on. Hi, Char. I'm so happy you're here. I think that for anyone who is in a place where you don't have access, I just want you to know that you deserve to have access. And my prayer is that we work together to create it.
I mean, thank you all for being here. Bye-bye.